Well, good morning, everybody. Melanie, the librarian here at the Box of Books, and Alfred and I are going to present Berries for the Birds. And I'm sure most of you that are listening or will be listening are from here in Allegheny County. So it's Friday, and it's one of those very, tempting late winter with a hint of early spring day out there in the low 40s, a high haze, sun shining through. My first pair of bluebirds just showed up this morning to check out the various bluebird houses to see which one they want, although I know which one they're going to choose. However, tomorrow, if you haven't listened to the news, we're in for a big, heavy snowstorm with lots of wind all tonight and tomorrow. So if you're feeding the birds, put out an extra handful late in the afternoon today so they can kind of fatten up before the big snow hits. Our topic is berries for the birds. And since Melanie is the only one here in person, she's going to wind up being the class and having to answer some questions that she wasn't planning on doing. So she doesn't know what I'm going to be asking her. So sometimes she'll know the answer.
And most of the times I won't.
And sometimes she won't. All righty. It's middle March.
Do you want your PowerPoint up yet?
Yes, why don't we put the PowerPoint up? And at this point, I'd like to thank my fellow Master Gardener, Terry Haas, 5 or 6, I forget, years ago. She kindly, since I don't have a computer, and she does, and she knows how to find the magic on it, went out and with permission found images to go along with this presentation of berries for the birds. I do plan this year to take pictures from my own backyard, so to speak. So the next time I do it, we'll have originals from Allegheny County to show. Before we get started, let me think, how do I want to get started here? This morning, I hunted up, first of all, my PowerPoint, and then I couldn't find my original notes from a few years ago, so I sat down and off the top of my head, made some new notes. And then, of course, what happened? I found the old notes. So I have here before me 2 sets of notes, which from time to time, I will glance down because even though I'm familiar with 90% of the material, sometimes I go, as Melanie well knows, off the track a little bit because something interesting happens. There's 1 or 2 bits of information that I really don't want to miss in this presentation. So from time to time, I'll be glancing down at my double set of notes here. I don't know, Melanie, I'm just going to, off the top of my head, ask you, why bother growing berries for the birds? Can't we just feed them? Buy food at the store?
Well, I would be concerned that it wasn't as healthy for them as natural berries.
Okay, now Melanie just started feeding the birds, what, a year ago? Is that right?
Probably about a year and a half.
A year and a half ago, like many people during COVID shutdown, what do you do when you're stuck at home? So a lot of people who never bothered watching birds and or feeding them in the winter or providing, have you put any nest boxes up yet?
I haven't put nest boxes up, but they like to build them in my rhododendrons.
Oh, do they? Do you know
my
what
blue
kind?
Jays.
The blue jays?
Yes.
Is that right close to the house?
Very close to the house.
Isn't that interesting?
So close to the
Oh,
house.
that is interesting. Mine are back in the woods.
Okay.
The blue jays. All right, where was I going with this? But what do you tend to buy at the store, food for the birds in the winter?
Like the suet.
Suet.
And then just regular seeds.
Yeah. Sunflower seeds or a mixture.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there are some birds that just don't eat that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the 4-year-old. You serve them the liver and they just sit and look at it. They won't eat it.
Right.
So there are some birds, and they tend to be the ones that come back in the spring, like the robins and the bluebirds, that really are berry eaters, especially in the early spring. Bugs and berries, the 2 B's, B and B's. So if you don't have either, well, the bugs tend not to be around in the winter, which is why so many birds go south. And unless you plant berry bushes, they don't have that either. So that's one of the reasons we want to do this. And you're right, natural is what they evolved with and is probably best for them. just like for us.
Mhm.
So what I'm going to do now is talk about 10 or 11 trees and shrubs that provide feed for the birds in one sort or another. And the first, and I remember when I did this a few years ago, my daughter in California had her whole work staff tune in. So there were like 8 people from California listening to an Allegheny County Berry for the Birds talk,
Oh, right.
even though only a few of the trees and shrubs I talked about also grow in Southern
Oh, right.
California. So, and I know that people that are listening, some only have a yard.
Mhm.
They live in town, maybe they live in an apartment. A few of us are lucky, we're out in the country and we have more land. So depending if you only can grow one tree or shrub for the bird, you want to take a wild guess, Melanie, what it might be? She's racking her brain.
I have no idea.
No idea. All righty. I would choose what we call, oh, I just remembered. Let me write down. I was racking my brain for this guy's Robert Service. I bet we just diverge here for a moment. I bet you know who Robert Service is, his famous poem,
Oh,
The Cremation of
yes.
who? Sam McGee?
Yes, I've
Yes.
heard of this. Yes.
Robert Service. We've all heard that
That
poem. We
poem, yeah.
learned it in what, 9th grade or
Yeah.
something?
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Cremation of Sam McGee. Well, this tree, shrub, a bush is called either a shadblow or a Juneberry. That's probably what most people know it as, or a service tree named after Robert Service, because one species grows as far north as Alaska, where poor old Sam McGee died of the cold. So here we have, this might actually be in my glade. I cannot remember if this was one of Terry's or my own woods in my backyard. I have a 10-acre backyard that's woods, deciduous woods. Never really totally cleared. It was logged years and years ago, 40 maybe, but never cleared for farming. So shadblow, let's just pause for a moment, the name. This is probably something most people don't remember anymore, unless you're quite elderly. Why is it named shadblow? Are you a fish eater? Do you eat fish? No. Aha. So you wouldn't know. One of the early April, May fish that come up from probably the Atlantic up the various rivers is the shad, which is a small fish, maybe 10 inches or so long, 12. And you can still find it local in the supermarkets in spring. It's the whole fish, so there's bones in it. And I can see why a lot of people don't eat it. But it used to be, in the old days, quite the treat. And since the shad come up the rivers at the same time that the shadblow blooms, that became one of its common names. I will not try and pronounce. You can if you're good at Latin. Now, if Terry was listening, the lady who did all these images for me, she took Latin in high school. So she knows her Latin, but I don't. So I'll go with the common names. The other is Juneberry, because it's a very early blooming tree and the berries become ripe in late June, early July. And then they are gone because they are truly loved by many, many birds, as well as chipmunks and squirrels. But the robin, the thrush family in particular, but many birds will gobble them up before they're quite ripe. So, but you don't want to pick them anyway. Some people actually make pies and jelly out of them, but they tend to be at the most a ½ inch in diameter, and the seed takes up a lot of that, the pit. So unless you're really into it or starving, leave them for the birds. And they tend to, like the raccoons in your corn, they tend to harvest them just before we would harvest them. So they disappear very quickly. By the end of June, July, they're all gone. Why don't we move on and take a look? Now, the wonderful thing about the shadblow And there are several species. Two of them are common here in southern New York in the southern tier. One is a tree that grows about to 40 feet, but the other one, which is, I think, Allegheny, the species name, is more of a shrub. It's a tree that grows about 10, 12 feet high, but it's shrubby. It grows from stolons from under the, and it makes a clump. Anyway, they're understory trees. They tend to grow in a deciduous forest or at the edge where they have partial shade, or when they're blooming in April, the sun is shining through when it shines. So they get plenty of sunlight early in the spring, but they're an understory tree and they don't grow that tall. And they don't get, their trunks are not that thick. And they bloom very early before the leaves come out. Years ago, when I first moved back here, I had a friend who was a student at the college, and he rented down the road from me. And he was so excited. He stopped by on his way to class one morning, so excited. He said, you know, when I woke up this morning, it was early May, and I looked out the window and oh my God, I thought it had snowed. Well, it wasn't snow. It was the shadblow in the woods everywhere blooming, and it looked like snow because the blossoms, as you can see, are small and they kind of hang in a cluster, and they're mostly white, maybe pale pink. And they're fragile. So if you know how the weather is in April and May, so a good wind and they're gone. So sometimes you only see them for a day or two or three. But if the weather cooperates and it's warm enough for them to bloom, not too hot, like sometimes we get these weird hot spells in April, and not windy or stormy, then they'll last for a week or two. And to me, they are the first tree or shrub that blooms here in Allegheny County. I call this, if you only plant one, the 4-season tree. It's beautiful in all 4 seasons. You get the beautiful flowers very early while the woods is still gray. And then you get the, let's look to the berries here. Now, this is when they're first forming. They become a very, very, very dark red, almost a purpley black red eventually in July, and they're edible. So that's in the summer. And then I don't think we have, you can try one more, but I don't believe we have a fall color. No, this is moving on. So in the fall, though, the leaves turn to this gorgeous sort of a coppery golden yellow in October. Very beautiful. And then in the winter, I'm sorry, we don't have the bark, but it's a beautiful gray bark with dark streaks in it. And the shape is quite, you know, the silhouette is quite beautiful. So if you can only have room for one, I would grow the smaller version that sprouts into a shrubby tree. And it'll be beautiful to look at all season long.
And that one gets berries as well.
Yes, they all get berries.
Okay.
Yeah. Here we go, there's something called the Saskatoon berry, and that's the shadblow that grows out in the prairies.
Okay.
You know, like Saskatoon up in Canada. So I'm guessing if you look up, let's back up to the Latin name, Amelanchier, or however you say it. If you look that up, either online or in a book, then it will list 4 or 5 different varieties. The one that grows up in Alaska, you know, the one around here and in Pennsylvania, the ones out on the prairie. So you can, and once again, it's out there in the nursery system. They've kind of genetically messed around with it a bit. So you get bigger flowers, pinker flowers, bigger berries, whatever. So your choice. I'm just looking, I think I covered most of the, alrighty. Now, most of what I'm presenting are indigenous, local to America, the Northeast, except look at the name on this one. Where do you think this one comes from, Melanie?
China.
In China, yeah, the western part of China. And one of the reasons it's grown here is that it's super hardy. I think a zone 4, it'll bloom back in the day when we were zone 4, which meant every couple of times in the winter it'd go down to 20 below. It would still bloom, which we didn't have in the old days a lot of trees that would bloom here because it just got too cold and the flower buds would be killed off, but not with the Nanking cherry. Prunus cherry, and that last part refers to this particular shrub. I call it it is a shrub. It will grow 10 feet high and spread 5, 6, 7 feet wide. However, it's one of those shrubs that's kind of like not like forsythia. It's glorious for 2 or 3 weeks like this. It blooms around the same time the chapeau does. So
I hate forsythia.
you don't like forsythia. Not even for 2 or 3 weeks.
I have a love-hate relationship with forsythia.
All right.
It's beautiful. Or
3
2
weeks. True. Well, okay. So the same thing with the Nanking cherry. It does have a saving grace. Once again, very early, and it blooms. And it does make berries, cherries. Once again, they're small. I've eaten a few, and they're kind of real blah. The birds like them. And the berries come in, or the cherries come in, let's see, late July and into August. However, it's not just, it's blah the rest of the season. So if you have enough space, it makes a great windbreak out there in the field, 100 feet from the house or so.
My forsythia bushes make a great dividing line between my property and my neighbor's junkyard. I don't know.
Collection of odds and ends. Yes. Okay. A great visual barrier for
Visual.
Yes. However, Nanking cherries have a couple of downsides. We in Allegheny County never used to have Japanese beetles.
Oh, yeah.
And now we do because of global warming. And anything in the prunus family, apples, cherries, etc. I'm not sure apples are in prunus, but they also. So come middle of July, I do my once a day walk around with my soapy water. And I don't have tons of them, but I have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 every day. And they just go into the soap and then they go down the toilet. So you have to look out for that. Any kind of cherry tree does not like wet feet. So you need to find, if your ground is on the verge of being a swamp, or has in the spring it's real wet, or after downpours in the summer it's wet, don't plant it. It needs dry feet. All righty, so that's that one. Did we look at the berries yet? No, now the flowers are beautiful. Oh, that's the other thing. Some plants do not like being loners. And I don't mean going to the bank. I mean, they don't like to be by themselves. And I learned that the hard way. I had a Nanking cherry for 7 years and it hardly produced any cherries. And then in my reading, it's one of those things that needs another one. Now it can be another one of the same variety. It doesn't have to be different. Like if you grow plums, you need different varieties. Apples, sometimes different varieties. This one, just get another one. And that reminds me, the horticulture trade hasn't messed around much with this shrub. If you get a Nanking cherry, chances are it's the old wild species, as it's been for, I don't know, 100,000 or whatever number of years. So 2 of them at least, and then you get lots of flowers and lots of berries. It's not, we'll get to the holly and the male-female thing. It's not that. It just needs company. All right, so there's the blossoms. And squint, squint, squint. There are the red, which for me get darker. Maybe that was taken in, let me think, middle or late July. But if you leave them into August, they get almost a purpley red color. And mine are never that thick on the bush. Do you ever, I'm a cynic, do you ever think the nursery catalogs, they glue on extra ones to make
make them look better?
Make them look more productive? Well, anyway, okay, so that's an Nanking cherry.
Are these edible to humans?
Yes, but they're blah tasting.
Oh.
Once again, leave them for the birds, unless you're starving or really into that sort of I'm going to do this no matter how it tastes.
No,
The people that eat dandelion greens.
no, no,
No, no.
no.
When you grow all that beautiful lettuce, why would you want to eat dandelion weeds?
Mm,
Okay, what's next?
crab apple.
Okay, now here is another example how in life nothing is perfect. On the one hand, you could say, who has not in May driven by an old farmhouse? Usually it's an apple tree, but it could be a crab apple.
Mhm.
Once again, in the old days, I'm thinking more people grew crab apples to mix in with their apples for pie to make it tart, or
Okay.
maybe even for cider. But those crab apples tended to be more like what, 2-3 inches in diameter, like small apples.
Okay.
And this reminds me, when I was a teenager, we had a bungalow in the north of New York City, about 50 miles near West Point.
Mhm.
And me and my sister and my 2 cousins, we'd spend the whole day roaming in the woods, camping out, hiking,
Mhm.
playing, I don't know what. And one day in the woods, we found a foundation, probably 100 years ago, had been a farmhouse, and now the woods had grown back in. And there was this crab apple tree with these 2-inch red crab apples. Well, we were so excited. So we all had loose shirts.
Mhm.
So the 4 of us brought home a bunch of crab apples to my mom and grabbed a big bowl and dumped them in and said proudly, "Mom, you can make us a crab apple pie." My mother looked at the crab apples and at us and said, "I'll do that. You guys peel them and slice them up." Well, a couple of hours later, that was the first and the last crab apple pie I've ever bothered trying to make because it just was too much time.
Mhm.
Now, if you want the crab apples for the birds, though,
Mhm.
although they'll peck at a bigger apple,
Mhm.
but there are many varieties that are small, 1/2 inch to inch in diameter. Now, the wonderful thing about crab apples, let's think about, okay, first size. Regular standard crab apples, like apples, can get to be 25 feet high eventually, so some people can't fit that in their yard, but they're dwarf ones and semi-dwarf ones. The dwarf ones maybe go to 8 feet, which is great because you can almost reach that high, no falling off ladders or chairs. And your semi-dwarfs, 12 feet. So you can choose your size. And we'll get back to the problem with diseases and bugs in a few minutes. Look for varieties that are resistant to certain types of diseases more than the bugs. Some diseases, you can find a variety where it's like a vaccination.
Okay.
You're 90% immune to it. So if you like the color of the blossoms and the color of the crab apple, then choose the one that's resistant. Makes sense, right? We don't want to be spraying. Okay, so color choice: white to all shades of pink to almost purpley, rosy red. So depending on the color you like, and please, if you're going to plant it next to your house, make sure the paint and the color of the blossoms go well together. The university, a decade or 2 ago, somebody left them money to plant things. So what did they plant? Well, they planted a lot of azaleas with this mauve, purpley lavender flower. And where do they plant it? Next to the red brick buildings, and it looked god awful. Fortunately, they also weren't hardy enough, and so they've all died out. But come on, guys. If you have an orange house or a weird colored house, then you have to be careful about what you plant next to it.
Right.
I think, unless you're colorblind or blind or don't care. All right, so color. And then the same thing with the crab apples, which tend, they can be golden or coppery or red or burgundy. Probably we should show some here. Okay, there are the blossoms, 5 petals, just like apples. And there's some yellow ones. And once again, they're pretty small. Now, the fun thing about crab apples, let's not go there yet. I got another 2 stories. When I was teaching at the Tech one year, and it was March, And they had some crab apples planted on their lawns around the buildings. And I was on the second floor and I was looking out, and the robins had come back. It was late March. And there were crab apples that had dropped to the ground in the fall. And then I'm guessing we had an early snow. And so they got covered up, and the late birds didn't eat them all up. But they fermented sitting on the ground. So here was this flock of robins that had pigged out on these fermented crab apples, staggering around the lawn, obviously drunk. It was really funny. And the other time was my first husband was a pilot. And so I had learned a little bit about flying. And I think we all know this, whether you're swimming across a river or flying from here to Rochester, you can't just fly straight from here to Rochester, let's say pretty much straight north, if there's a very strong wind out of the west. Because if you try to do that, you'll wind up over in Webster, somewhere to the east. So you have to aim to the northwest to get true north. So it was once again springtime, and I had a crabapple tree about 50 feet out from my woods, which is to the north. And the woods, the Cornell boys many years ago had planted a row of Norway spruce there to protect the deciduous woods behind it to the north. And so here were these three robins, and they were determined they were going to clean off the last of those crab apples. But the wind was so fierce that day out of the west, they would fly out of the Norway spruce at an angle to the southwest and wind up straight south in the crabapple tree. They'd grab a crabapple, and then once again angling, they would fly back to get straight back into the spruce trees to eat them. So birds are smart and they're fun to watch.
We had a crabapple tree in our yard growing up, and my brother used to make these into weapons.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, because they
a slingshot or
yeah,
just throw it? Oh, a slingshot.
throwing them. They
throwing them.
really hurt when they
Oh, yes.
whack you.
All right. What else? What's next? Red twig dogwoods. Okay, let me just look at my notes here so I don't forget something. Where are we? Red twig. Now, this is a wild plant that grows around. One of the nice things about it, if you have a damp spot, they love damps. They don't mind damp spots. As you can see, they're shrubs. They will get to 8 feet, although now with all our overpopulation of deer, they tend to get chewed down every winter, so they don't really get that high that often. They're stoloniferous, I think is the word, that they come from the crown, and they make a hedge all by themselves. So if you wanted a hedge like this, I'd say you have patience. You're going to stay there for a while. Plant them 10 feet apart, because within 10 years, they'll have run together. Alrighty. They do like sunshine. They prefer that, although I think they'll grow. I have some growing on the east side, no, on the west side of my woods. So they deal with partial shade. Now, let me think here. How am I going to say this? First let's look at this. Even though they need a bit of keeping under control if you put them near the house, I would suggest, look at this scene in the wintertime. There's the snow and this beautiful red twig. And by the way, there's some other varieties that are golden or even bronzy color. Notice Cornus. That's the dogwood family. They're like cousins to our beautiful white flowering dogwood and many other dogwoods. Plant them somewhere fairly close to your kitchen window, where you sit down with your coffee in the morning of a winter day, and you can look out and see the beautiful red twigs against the white snow. I think that's why most people grow them. However, if you want red twigs, the twigs are usually the reddest on first year growth. The second year, they're more of a red brown, and by the third year, they're much more of a brown color. So here's how you handle it. One of two ways. One way would be, let me think, in the fall or late in the winter. Well, no, not in the fall. You want to have the new growth 1 to 2 years old through the winter. So then at the end of the winter, say in late March, prune them down to like 2 inches, the whole bush.
Hmm.
Especially after 4 or 5 years, you have such a big root system
Mhm.
that will easily grow 2 to 3 feet in the following summer. And then the next fall and winter, you'll have once again all these young, beautiful red twigs to look
Mm.
at. Okay, the other way, if you just can't bear to cut it all down, do the typical 1/3.
Mm.
Okay, what have we got now? Okay, the flowers are different than what we've looked at so far. They're tiny and they're, oh, I forget the word. There's a word for this kind. It's like a panicle, like elderberries. It likes a flat plate, and they're maybe 4 inches in diameter, the whole round bunch of little flowers. And they come in, I think, June. And then what happens? The very sweet little white berries with a black dot. And they last, I'm thinking, till September. They're ready to eat for the birds or the chipmunks. And by October, though, they're pretty much gone. Now let's see if we have one more picture with the winter color. Yes, and this is another almost 3-season shrub, because in the fall, September, October, the leaves all turn this beautiful, I don't know, what do you call that color? Burgundy.
Burgundy. Yeah.
Burgundy. And you still have a few
Mhm.
white berries that the birds have missed so far. Let me see. So where you can see it from the house in the winter, and maybe do some pruning to keep it young and red, and it doesn't mind the damp. Okay, what's next? I'm going to skip this one because we don't really have time. Okay, our elderberries. Ta-da. Now this is like your forsythia, sort of an unruly, nondescript kind of a shrub. They can get quite large, go up 10, 12, 15 feet even. I didn't realize that when I did mine. And it also suckers. So it wants to make a family all of its own. So once again, maybe if you have a small yard, you can't do this, but if you have more space, they will grow in an open woodland, dapple shade. They'll grow on, say, the east side of a building or a woods where they get just, east side, so they get the morning sun, or out in the open. And once again, the panicles, although they're much larger, more like 8, 9, 10 inches in diameter. And let's see what the close-up looks like. Now, these are called elderflowers. And when I was younger and had young children and was more into eating wild stuff, this is one of the wild things you can eat that's really good. But after you cut the flower head off, the whole clump, you really have to shake it, because otherwise there's spiders or something. And if you have 10-year-old kids and you put it in your pancakes, your crepes, they as sure as shooting going to find that spider, and then they'll never eat them again. So shake them. I don't bother washing, but I shake it really well. And it makes a wonderful crepe. In other words, think pancakes. Maybe you want to use a little sour cream or buttermilk, half and half with your milk, maybe an extra egg, and a little less flour. So if you have a cup of flour, a half a cup of these blossoms. And how do you get the blossoms without the stems? Because you really don't want to be eating stems. But look how tiny they are. Scissors, and you shear them off. And then, you get a few stems, but so what, And it's wonderful. And I was so excited to hear a few years ago, now correct me, who married Prince Harry? Was it Meghan, the American?
Oh, yes.
And her cake for her wedding cake was an elderflower wedding cake.
Oh, really?
Yes, really. I wonder if people could look it up online if she put the recipe out.
I'm sure it's out there somewhere.
But I bet you could take an angel food cake recipe or even a sponge cake recipe and, reduce the flour a bit.
And add elderflower.
If it were 3 cups of flour, maybe you could get away with 2 and 1 of the flour, or 2 and a half and a half.
Okay.
Anyway, do we have a last picture of the elderberries? And of course, the other thing we can do with elderberries is make wine, right? Elderberry wine. So that's what they look like. Now, elderberries are interesting. They don't bloom until almost the 4th of July, late June, early July. However, they're very small. By late August, September, and by October, they're all gone. The birds love them. The raccoons love them. Everybody in the woods loves them. So you have to be out there and grab a few if you want to make your wine, or we used to make jelly, elderberry jelly. And then in Lent, when we couldn't eat meat, we'd eat elderberry jelly sandwiches. Okay, elderberry. How are we doing on time? What have we got?
We have 12:08. So you have like 20 minutes?
20 minutes. Okay. Let me just see where we're at. Where am I? Oh, here it is. It got buried. What's next?
I have the black cherry tree next.
Okay, now this is not for the yard because it'll get to 40, 50, 60 feet eventually. So unless you're willing to cut it down after 20 years, because your neighbor's complaining. Not only is it dropping cherries in their yard and all of their terrace or their sidewalk, but it's blocking all their sun, you know how it goes when you live in the town. But I have black cherry trees as part of my deciduous woods, along with red and sugar maples and beech and other trees. But those are the biggies in my woods, the ones that would be canopy trees. Black cherry, of course, is a very valuable wood for furniture. But it's also very valuable as a source of food for all sorts of wildlife. Turkeys, all sorts of birds. Once again, the chipmunks and the squirrels. This one looks like it has several trunks, and I'm guessing it grew out in either a big yard or in a field. All the ones that I have in the woods tend to have one trunk, and the lower branches have been crowded out when the woods was younger. So let's see what it looks like. Once again, those long, is that called a raceme? I think. Not exactly sure, but
I love that you think I would know.
I don't know. Tiny little flowers on like a long stem. And once again, my trees are all 50 to 120 years old, so I can't see them. It's too high up, the blossoms. I think they bloom in June, but I'm not exactly sure. And do we have a picture of the cherries? And then they get quite darker, almost black. But I never see them either, because once again, they're very desirable. So I'm guessing by August, September, that's when they are ripe and when they are gobbled up. Let me see what I had to say about here. Where is it? I don't have anything on that. As I guess I pretty much covered it, because I'm thinking most people would not plant this in their yard. All righty, American holly. Now, this is the one that's going to cause you the most work, most likely. We talked about needing to plant 2 of the Nanking cherry to make lots of cherries and flowers. Well, you're not going to get the holly berries unless you plant a male and a female plant. It's like the old Catholic schools. You know, the boys all went to one school, the girls all went to another. Or think about the Eastern tradition of harems. You're going to need at least 1 male plant to pollinate maybe 10 female plants. And like the harem, they all more or less have to live together in a community, maybe 50 feet apart. Now, you can find on the market a female plant with 1 branch. What's the word? When you
Grafted.
Thank you. Grafted on a male. They're more expensive, and I wouldn't trust them because quite often in a situation like that, an extra harsh winter, or the dog and that one branch gets broken off or dies off, and then you're just stuck with a green holly bush with no red berries.
That's what my back, the one in the back never gets berries. The one in my front does, so it must not have a male in the backyard.
Or the backyard one is a male,
Or the backyard one has male.
because where's the male one?
I don't
Let's make-
know.
She doesn't know. Well, you don't know just by looking. You need probably a degree in horticulture and a microscope, I'm guessing, to find out which is which, because it's not so obvious.
Right.
It's like sexing chickens. It's not obvious easy, the day-old chicks. So that said, one male per 10 females within 50 feet, rough rule of thumb. Let's take a look at the berries. Now, holly, there's two other problems with hollies. First, I'll mention the zoning. Once again, years ago when we were zone 4, there was hardly any species of holly that would survive here. It was just too cold. Holly really is a mid-Atlantic and southern plant. When I lived with my in-laws in Kentucky, Marge, my mother-in-law, had a 40-foot American holly tree in her front yard. Her front yard was over an acre. And this thing was it was 40 feet high, and I don't know, 15 feet in diameter, and just loaded, just gorgeous. But Kentucky's a good 10 to 15 degrees warmer on any day than here. So however, there was, once again, go online or go to the library and get a book out on hollies. There are many species. Some have blackberries, black holly berries, but most are red. Some have prickly edge leaves, some have smooth edge leaves. Most are shiny, but they're all sexed, where you have to have at least one male in your harem of female plants, because the berries come on the females.
I never have this many berries.
No, I don't either.
This seems like a lot.
And once again, I think even though we've moved up into zone 5, the cool part, it's still cold.
Okay.
So let me think. There was something. Oh, don't let me forget the acid soil. But if you haven't done it already, think of what happens to your soil in the winter. Come November, everything freezes up, and any water in the soil is locked in. So evergreen plants, like hollies, they still transpire moisture, especially if they're in a sunny position in the wintertime. Think the south side of your house. And the wind also evaporates any moisture that transpires to the leaves. So if you want your evergreens, hollies in particular, to survive, plant them either on the east side of your house or the north side of your house, or provide some kind of fencing, lattice perhaps, in the wintertime to cut off the winds that come from the west, northwest, and the sun, which hits to the south. So mine are on the east side of the house. And I actually, in the last 10 years, have erected a 4x4, 2 of them, lattice, the thin little lattice, which breaks up the wind but doesn't totally block it, just on the, let me think, south corner to help cut down on the sun and the wind. And they really appreciate that. Now, the other problem with hollies is, unless your soil is very acid, and I'm talking about 4, 5 to 5, which is not normal for around here, they're not going to thrive. They'll sit there for the first year you plant them, and then the leaves will start turning yellow, and then they'll be very unhappy, and they won't grow, and then they'll die, because they really need an acid soil, which you can deal with. This is why it's good to plant companionly. Everything that likes either the shade or sandy soil or humusy soil or acid soil or well-drained soil, whatever it is, only make a bed that suits that. So what I did on the east side of my house, it's about 24 feet long, about 8 feet from the house. I raised it up about 4 inches by mixing in a lot of peat moss. And if you don't believe in peat moss, you can use composted leaves or just compost. or rotted sawdust, maybe 3 years old. Mix it in with sand, loosen it, and in your topsoil, loosen it all up, and then do that pH test. Find out what the pH is, and then buy some pure sulfur. I really feel strongly about this. Most box stores sell it in the box, but if you look at the ingredients, it's only 15% sulfur and the rest is all fill. So you're paying for fill. Who needs fill? So you go to a more local place and you can buy the pure sulfur, which is a yellow powder, maybe granular, maybe just a powder. And then what you're paying for is pure sulfur. And you once again go online or in your book, or master gardeners have charts. Whatever your pH is, you want to drop it down to say 5 at least. It tells you how many pounds you need per square foot. So you do your math. I only have one bush. It's 4 feet by 4, 16 square feet. And I only have to drop it from 6 to 5. So you look in the chart, there it is. Don't overdo. Don't waste. And it might not be good to overdo. So let me see. They're the fussiest. I want to make sure that, where are we here? Oh, once again, if you have a dry fall, water well before the ground freezes up. So that gives it a chance to soak up before the drought comes, meaning everything's frozen. Can't have access to the water. I've lost track of my things here. Okay, what's next? Make sure I right. Okay. Now, why have I put in creeping juniper? Lovely. Well, this is a plant, juniper, and there are many species. This one's, I'm going to call it horizontal. Landscapers love this plant. If you have sunshine, dry, well-drained soil, and poor soil, junipers will thrive. And they come in all sizes and all colors. The horizontal one, I really like it. It's anywhere from 4 to 6 inches high, and it slowly spreads. And it's a lovely blue-green color throughout 6-7 months of the year. But as soon as the frosts come in October, I don't have a picture of the color in the fall, it turns a beautiful sort of a plum silvery gray color, which is really nice. Now, when I planted these 30 years ago, a couple of them around my house, I wasn't thinking about berries for the birds. So let's look at the next picture. Once again, they have male and female plants, like the holly. And that's what the flower looks like. And that's the blue, gray blue. They look like blueberries, don't they? But it's the juniper berry, which anybody that drinks gin and tonics, gin has the juniper berry in it for flavoring. But the birds love it. But mine are either all male or all female, and I've never seen a berry. So my guess is, if you really want to have some male plants in with your female to get the berries, you can't just go to the box store because they're not going to know. They just, some kid who's there minimum wage, and they don't know diddly about the plants they're selling. I'm not even sure most nurseries would be able to tell. So you might have to go to the Cooperative Extension out of Cornell, which was where they do all their breeding and plants up near Syracuse. I'm forgetting the town, one of those towns on Route 4. It's 4. Before the thruway, the main drag between Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. They would know, and they would probably could sell you some, because I know years ago I bought all my fruit trees through them and my blueberries through them. And they would then, you would get a mix, and if you want the berries for your, now, okay, juniper, there's actually one that only grows about an inch high, and the guys, it's also these guys, the model railroading, and then they do their landscapes, and they want real live plants. They buy this juniper, But I like the ones that are 4 to 8 inches high. But you can get taller ones, all the way up to 2 or 3 feet high easily. And then there's some that are columnar, or how you say that word. And then also the colors. I tend to like the silvery blue gray green, but there's yellowy green. I don't like that, but that's me. There's dark green. So whatever you need. So what's next here? Why did I stick in a spruce tree? And does that might be my last one? Let me take a look at what my pictures cut out. Yes. Why did I stick in a spruce tree? Well, for a couple of reasons. And why a white spruce? They make cones that are only about 1 to 2 inches long. And once again, this is a nice Christmas tree shape, isn't it? The spruce trees. They are prickly, but they make a nice Christmas tree shape. We usually buy fir trees for Christmas, same kind of shape, but they are soft leaved. And some people actually use pine trees, which I think is weird, but whatever. On a spruce tree, the cones all hang down. And on a fir tree, they sit on a branch and go up. So these are small. The most spruce trees you see around Allegheny County are the Norway spruce from Norway. And they have long cones, 4, 5, 6 inches long. But the white spruce has small cones. But as you can see, the seed, and there are quite a few birds in the wintertime that will peck open the cone to get at the seed. Why a white spruce? Well, anybody that in the last 20 years, since our men have quit hunting deer by and large, we are overpopulated with deer, and they're eating up our woods and they're eating up our landscape. But they don't tend to eat up the white spruce. They'll gobble up your pine and your fir trees. You have to fence if you want to get them, above the reach of the deer's chomp chomp. But they tend to leave the white spruce alone. You know why? Or Melanie. Doesn't know why.
I don't know.
Okay. If you break off an edge, it smells like cat litter. Used cat litter. And so the deer don't like that. We don't like it. So unless they're absolutely starving to death, that's the last thing on their menu. It also gives wonderful protection for all sorts of creatures. And something I discovered, I don't know, 20 years ago, maybe. And I never read this anywhere in a book, but after a few years of observation, I thought, when the robins make their first nest, which is usually in early May, it's always in my white spruce. One year, I have 4 down by my pond to the southwest, and then I have a whole row towards the road, to the east of the house. And I've seen nests in both those trees in May. Think of a robin's nest with the 4 little blue eggs. Well, they're predators, blue jays, raccoons, snakes even, although I've never seen a snake here in the north do it, but they do. They need to be hidden. So the birds know that, and they make their nests in the spruce trees. Come their second brood in late June, I'm thinking, early July. I have now a 30-year-old, probably 40-foot high, white birch in the side west yard. And I have a smaller, maybe 15 feet high, sugar maple in the front yard. And by then the leaves, late, what did I say, late June? The leaves are all out. You don't even see the nest until the leaves all drop in October. And then, there's a nest. And they've used both those trees. Now, for some reason, they have not nested in my pin oak, which is also out there to the southwest by the pond. I don't know why. But both the birch tree high up and then the maple tree right in front of the house. So it's interesting. Okay. I don't know if anybody has signed in. If anybody's out there has any questions. Melanie, do you have any questions before I wrap this up?
I don't.
It doesn't. All right. Where's my wrap up? No, that's not my wrap up. Hang on. All right. Just a reminder, where do I plant these things if I'm going to plant them? Okay, one obvious place is right around your house, the foundation planting.
Mm.
And once again, we don't want roots growing into a foundation. We don't want you having to prune the backside of the plant every spring because it's now rubbing up against the house.
Mhm.
Like Wuthering Heights. What was that branch
Mhm.
that rubbed against the window? All righty, here are some goodies for your foundation. Holly, juniper, perhaps a shrubby shadblow tree that maybe is on the corner and a good 10 feet out from the house, and your red twigs. Those are all manageable. They look good throughout much of the year. So, once again, what color is your house?
Mhm.
I don't particularly like white houses, but I think any kind of pale gray is perfect for any kind of flower. If you think about it, like your shirt.
Yeah.
Yep, or even paler.
Yeah.
Anything will go good against that. Or white. But with strange colors like turquoise or pink or that purple house. Where's that purple house? Down in Belmont, I think there's a purple house. Then you have to think about it. All righty. If you have a woods, if you're lucky enough to have a woods on your property, so at the edge of the woods, or you have a big enough yard that you want to hedge to mask your neighbors, whatever. And then I would suggest the Nanking cherry, elderberries, red twigs, let them grow taller. Shadblow, I should probably talk about deer here in a minute, shouldn't I? Specimen. And once again, you have to be careful. America has this thing about my yard, my lawn. I become the slave mower of the lawn. Fertilize it so it grows more. So I have to mow more. And then they plop trees in the middle of it, which of course makes the mowing harder, right? But who can resist one or two specimen trees out in your front yard somewhere? I would suggest them the crabapple if you don't have too wet soil. Oh, you know what we forgot? Wasn't it on that program? The Cornelian cherry. Oh,
no, I didn't see that one.
Didn't see that. I may just talk about it in a few minutes. The hawthorn, didn't talk about that either. What happens to thumb drives when they sit in the drawer for a year or two? Do things disappear off them because they're bored?
Not usually.
We have to add those. We can add those, right? I have them.
Yeah.
Where do I have them? That's funny. We'll have to figure that out. Okay. Or a white spruce. If you're willing, remember it goes to 80 feet. After 20 years, after 10 years, you cut it down for a Christmas tree. Or after 20 years, you cut it down because otherwise it's going to just dominate you and your neighbors and no one's going to be happy. Right? But it's fine for 10, 15 years. Then if you own a woods, you can add some black cherries, some shadblow if they're not already there. Now, what's this I added? Oh, okay. What time do we have time? We don't really have time, do we?
It's 12:31.
Okay, we don't have time. Let me just then mention something coming up starting in April on Friday at 11:30 to 12:30, starting April 8th, and then going every other week for, I think it's going to be 15 sessions to the end of October. We're going to have a program called Grow Your Own. And it's basically going to be vegetable gardening. Maybe a bit of a diversion once in a blue moon towards some flowers or shrubs. But basically it's going to be veggies. And what was my first topic? It was going to be choosing your site and then thinking small. Nothing like plowing up an acre, all enthusiastic in April, and then by the heat of July saying,
what did I do?
what did I do? And it all goes to weed. So we start small, 10 square feet, 2 double beds size, or a long strip, 25 feet long, 4 feet wide, no paths, no wasting of garden space. So we're going to start with that in April and run through the summer and fall. So if you're interested in gardening, you can tune in then. And that's it.
That is it.
That's it.
Yep.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. And April is the time to plant things like this if you're going to do it.